Hey guys, happy Halloween! So, what's better to celebrate this scary day other than a rewatch of the highest rated horror film directed by a woman?
New card. What do you think?
Oh,
Hopefully, my costume already gives it away. I'm talking today about American Psycho, specifically about who Patrick Bateman is and why he gets away with his murders. But before we all get our iced face masks out of the fridge and start the morning and fitness routine, please make sure you like and subscribe. Well, maybe it gets you a table at Dorsia, who knows? And I'd also like to begin with reading to you the synopsis of Letterboxd so we are all on the same page. I think my mask of sanity is about to slip. A wealthy New York investment banking executive hides his alternate psychopathic ego from his co-workers and friends as he escalates deeper into his illogical fantasies. Okay, not so sure about the fantasy part, but we will get to that. So who is Patrick Bateman, the probably best dressed serial killer of movie history and pop culture icon? I think many of you love him. I just hope ironically.
there still was the Wall Street trading floors and everything. I went and visited, all different levels of people at Wall Street, but the guys on the trading floor, when I arrived there before making the film, I got there and a bunch of them, they were going, "Oh, Patrick Bateman," and patting me on the back and going, "Oh, yeah, we love him." And I was like, "Yeah, ironically, right?" And they were like, "What do you mean?" So it was always worrying, even back then. But, clearly, look, it's a satire.
And he's very much defined through his looks. Like his morning skincare and fitness routine is essential. He only wears bespoke suits and Oliver Peoples glasses, and his flawless appearance is to him as important as the status symbols he owns. In the original book, Patrick only wears Cerruti suits and has a Rolex on his wrist. Whereas in the movie, Cerruti only allowed the actor to wear their suits in scenes where no killings are involved, and Rolex completely refused to see their brand's watches on the actor's wrist, so only side characters wear Rolex watches while Patrick has to wear a cheaper brand.
You can't bleach a Cerruti. Out of the question. Two!
So he always lives on a surface, his looks are super important to him, and the character actually has no background information. We know from the get-go that his mid-level job he actually got because his father owns the firm, but other than that, nothing is revealed.
Where they were talking about what's his childhood, what's the reason he's become this, I was like, none of that really matters.
I think personally that the highest quality of this story is that there is actually no character development whatsoever, and the only progress is the intensifying brutality of the crimes, while the true horror stems from the monotony and motivelessness of his actions, and there's simply no way out. So he lives completely on the outside, is superficial, and also this is in tradition of eccentric figures in literature, just like Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray. And they share their obsessive passion and their attention for detail, while one of them is like too much into jewelry, the other one knows every detail about his CD collection and could talk about it for hours. And just like with the picture of Dorian Gray, also Patrick Bateman's surface doesn't match his inner rotten soul, which is one reason why both of them get away with their crimes. The lack of a true inner identity combined with the desire to stand out by a slightly better haircut and yet the desperate desire to fit in create a conflict that lead us to the second aspect of Patrick Bateman's character, the doppelganger motive.
No, Helen.
Is that a raincoat?
He is an iconic movie villain for sure, yet very interchangeable with literally everyone in his social circle. He gets confused with other people all the time, and also looks up to an enemy that seems very similar to him, Paul Allen, who always gets the better work projects, has the more impressive business card, and even looks slightly more perfect. While Patrick actually seems to suck at his job and can't even get a reservation at the fancy restaurant Dorsia. However, I very much like the idea that Paul and Patrick are actually the same person, split into two on a metaphorical level by the pressure and horrors of the system they live in. So very much in the tradition of Dostoevsky's doppelganger. Either Patrick spins out his dark side to cope with it in a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde scenario, or Paul Allen actually is a fantasy of Patrick that describes a higher future self, just like in Theodor Fontane's Boto. Yet Patrick can't just ride past him on a horse, he actually has to kill him once he realizes that he'll never live up to his dream. Funnily enough, the codependence of Christian Bale's and Jared Leto's character continues on a meta level in movie history with Batman and the Joker. Patrick also gets away with it because he's hard to identify. He actually blurs into a group of Wall Street guys all wearing a tri-cleaned Valentino suit uniform. Which brings us to aspect number 3. Patrick also is defined by the 90s capitalism bubble he lives in. The lack of emotional connection is nothing Patrick specific. Actually, everyone around him is so self-absorbed. When he tries to make these weird jokes about him working in murders and executions, or even tries to actually confess, nobody's listening. You could read that either that they are actually not hearing him because all he says is in his mind and he lives into delusion, not being able to get through to them anymore. But more likely, I think, is that they very well hear him, yet nobody cares. And that's why they are all empty and cold inside, so the horrors don't get to them, they don't feel any empathy, and they also not scared, because they think that their power and wealth makes them somewhat untouchable. So that's the ultimate critique of 90s Wall Street capitalism. Therefore, another reason why Patrick gets away with it is because nobody cares, and he also has the wealth to hire a lawyer who gets rid of all the traces. Patrick Bateman, of course, is also defined by the outrageous level of brutality. His morning routine also contains watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre as a fitness motivation. His name is inspired by Norman Bates, and he also reacts hypersensitive to non-threatening situations, while he lacks completely of any empathy in really horrifying scenarios. In a YouTube video linked below, I picked up the theory that the scene in which Detective Kimball tries to blind Patrick with this sun reflection is actually a test of his reflexes and to see any signs of him being a psycho. While I'm not entirely sure if this scientifically makes any sense, to me it still becomes very clear that the detective is able to cut through Patrick's mask, but nevertheless seem to never be able to get ahead of him. And that's another reason why Patrick gets away with it. Like, his level of brutality is matched by cold planning and a high level of attention to detail, just like this precautious raincoat, to actually be able to get away and not get caught by the detective. And weirdly enough, this same detective seems to run around in another movie 1 year earlier, namely Boondock Saints, being also super unsuccessful. Lastly, Patrick might get away with it because his crimes aren't real. While the original book leans a bit more towards actually horrifying accurate observations of society, I feel like the film positions itself as a over-the-top satire, in which Patrick is shown as an unreliable narrator, and he also lost complete connection to reality. The helicopter chase for sure can't be real, and the chainsaw finale is so extreme that it hardly could have ever happened without being noticed. Which, by the way, reminds me of Anton Chigurh in No Country for Old Men. The movie version here rather functions as a deadly metaphor than an actual person, and amongst other reasons, that's also because he can walk around with this overproportionate weapon and nobody notices. Batman actually works better as a horror character and metaphor if it remains unsolved if the murders actually happened or not. So there you have it. Please check out my business card to where to find me on Letterboxd and Instagram, and then please excuse me because
I have to return some videotapes.